Hi everyone, I'm Gertie, and here we are with a new month of Patreon. I'm so excited to introduce to you the Elsa Culottes. So I've been wanting to do a culotte pattern for the longest time. I love 30s beach fashion, especially, so I've been thinking about culottes, palazzo pants, things that you might wear in a little set with a crop top. And then you guys have been requesting culottes for a really long time too. So I felt like this was the time to make it happen. So these are a very wide leg pant or short. You have 3 length options. You have a short option, a capri length option, and then a full length pant, which is like a palazzo pant. Okay, and the pants have an inverted pleat at center front and center back. And this was inspired by a vintage pattern I have in my stash. And that pleat gives the garment the look of being like secret pants, like you're wearing a skirt, but then you see, you can do everything that you can do in pants, like, go comb for beach shells or whatever you're going to do in these pants, right? So you have that inverted pleat, and then you have your pockets. Pockets are very important, and then a waistband. So you can make these on their own as separates. But of course, I know how much you love interchangeability. So these are part of the Lamour-series, which means you can use any of those bodices, and we'll link you to that page of all the interchangeable bodices in the Lamour-series, so that you can make rompers and play suits with these culottes as well. So these culottes are named for Elsa Schiaparelli, who was a 20th century fashion designer. She did a lot of avant-garde work. And in the 30s, she had a collection that featured a lot of culottes. So I thought that was a cool little historical tidbit. So today I'm going to be making the capri length separate culottes. So we're going to go ahead and get started talking about the pattern pieces and then our fabric and supplies. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the pattern pieces like we do every month. So we've minimized these down so you can see them all together. This pattern only has 5 pieces, so very manageable. You've got your pant front and your pant back. These have cutting lines for the shorts version, the capri length version, and then the full length version, okay? They're very wide. These are big pattern pieces because they do have a deep pleat at center front and center back. So make sure that you mark those pleat lines on the front and back after cutting your fabric. And then you also have your pant side front, which fills out that little gap where the pocket is cut out there. And then your pocket bag, which gets sewn right sides together to the pant and then flipped in to actually form the pocket. So, and then the final thing is your waistband. So you're going to cut one and one interfacing. And that is it. Very simple. Just 5 pieces. All right, so let's talk fabric and supplies. So you have a wide range of fabric options for these culottes, and your fabric choice is really going to determine the finished effect, right? So you can go, so for instance, you could go with something very drapey like this tropical rayon, which will give you a very kind of liquid drape and be much more flowy, right? Or if you want something more structural and dramatic, you could do something like this silk file, which, if you do the full length pant, it's really going to stand out with a sculptural sort of effect. Silk matka is also something that, it's not as structural as silk file, but it will give you a little bit more body, but it has a little bit of drape to it, which is nice. Other good options would be linens and linen blends. So this is a linen, this plaid. You can see how it's very light, perfect for summer. If you're looking for something really beachy, something like this would be great. These two are both linen blends. One is blended with cotton and one is blended with rayon. So you can see this is kind of the fabric I had in mind when designing these pants because it's perfect for summer days, very lightweight. You have just a little bit of body, but you're still going to get that sort of flowy effect. So it's a nice sort of like in the middle sort of option. Now, Other options could be potentially, this is another cotton linen blend with a little more body, something like an eyelet. This one's an embroidered cotton with no actual eyelet holes, so you wouldn't have to line or underline it. So this would be really cute, but any sort of embroidered cottons would be great. And then if you're sewing for fall or winter, this is a lightweight flannel-like wool. So this would be great if in your part of the world it's a little colder these days, so you can consider something like a lightweight wool. All right, so you will also need interfacing. You need interfacing yardage, like a lightweight fusible for your waistband. And then you'll also need some fusible strips of interfacing for your zipper opening. So either that kind I normally use on the roll, or you can cut 1¼ inch wide strips of fusible interfacing from your yardage. You will need a 9-inch regular zipper, okay? And all-purpose polyester thread, and then a hook and bar for your waistband closure. And that's it for your fabric and supplies. So next we'll move on to the sewing. Okay, we're gonna start with our culotte front. We have our marked darts. You can see that I have finished my seam allowance on the inseam and outseam and the hem, but I've left the waistline raw, the pocket edge, and the crotch curve raw. And make sure that you have your pleat line marked and your darts marked in. We're gonna start with sewing our front dart. So you're going to pin the legs together, making sure the legs are right on top of each other. And next we're gonna sew this, so make sure that you backstitch at the beginning, and then you can leave yourself some tails to tie off at the end of the dart. So I'm just gonna tie off this dart, doing a double knot. And then you can trim the threads close. And the next thing we're gonna do is press the dart. So I'm using a tailor's ham just so I can mimic the curve of the body here. And you're gonna be pressing the dart towards the pleat line or towards center front. So use some steam. Linen responds really well to steam. And we're gonna repeat the dart process on the pant side front. And next we'll come back and sew the pocket bag. Okay, I have my pocket bag, and just note that you can cut this out in your fashion fabric or your lining fabric. You want to have applied your interfacing to that curve on the pocket bag, and I have already finished my seam allowances on the outer curve and the short inner edge. And now we're gonna apply the pocket bag to the culotte front. And it's applied almost like a facing. You're gonna put it right sides together with the pant front along that pocket curve, and pin just around the curve here. So I'm pinning only where it's interfaced. And the next thing we're gonna do is go to the machine and stitch this at 5/8 of an inch around the pocket opening curve. Okay, next thing we're gonna do is to grade our seam allowances. So the pocket bag seam allowance should be the shorter one. You can trim it down to about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch. And then the culotte seam allowance will be slightly taller, about 1/8 of an inch taller. So trim them separately. And the next thing I'm gonna do is clip into these curves here to help this seam lay flat. So around the curviest part, you want to clip about every 1/2 an inch, clipping right up to your seam line, but obviously be careful not to clip through your seam line. And then when you get to this straighter area, you don't really need to clip as much. And the next thing we're going to do is open out the pocket bag from the pant and understitch. Okay, so I'm making sure that my seam allowances are oriented underneath the pocket bag, and then I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the seam line on the pocket bag itself, stitching through the pocket bag and the seam allowances underneath. Now, I have a really handy spot on my presser foot, which I can align with the seam line to make sure that I'm staying exactly 1/8 of an inch away from that seam line. And the thing about understitching, especially when you have all these clips, is that you need to keep checking that your seam allowances are where they're supposed to be. So as I'm going, I'm just going to periodically check to make sure that my seam allowances are underneath where I'm stitching, lifting up the pocket bag like that. And just continue stitching, holding those 2 layers kind of taut away from each other so you get a nice smooth surface there. And I'm going to go to the end and backstitch. The next thing we're going to do is to press the pocket bag to the inside of the culottes. So you're going to use your fingers to roll out your understitching to the edge of the seam, which will help you get a really professional, crisp looking pocket opening here. And I'm going to press directly on that edge and steam it. And this is very satisfying, especially in linen. You get a really beautiful edge here. So there's your finished pocket opening edge. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grab our pocket side front. That's that other piece that you sewed the dart in. And this forms the upper hip of the culotte, and it also forms the underlayer of your pocket bag. So you're going to lay it right side up on your surface and then put the pant right side up on top of it. Now match your finished pocket opening edges to the notches on the pant side front. You also have 2 darts to align on top of each other here and pin in place. And next I'm going to go to the pant side seam and I'm going to align the finished opening edge of the pocket to the notch on the pant side front. So just put a couple pins around the opening there, because what we're going to do now is lift up the pant front, so lift it away from the 2 pocket layers. And now you're going to pin these edges together around this curved edge. And next we're going to stitch around here, which will form the actual pocket itself, matching those finished edges. And just around the curved area, not the side seam. And next I'm going to go to my machine and stitch at 5/8 of an inch. The next thing I'm going to do is to just press this flat to make sure that all the layers are flat when wearing the pant. So just give it some steam and just press around that curved edge that you just stitched. Okay, now we're going to place the pant front back over the pocket layers. And now we can baste the upper edge and the side seam layers of the pocket and the pant front together. So just pinning in place along the side seam and the waistline. And now I'm going to stitch this in place using a long basting stitch. Okay, I have my stitch length set to about 4 to 5 millimeters. And I'm stitching with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just in those areas where I pinned to baste those layers together. Okay, so here's one completed pocket. I'm gonna repeat all those steps on the opposite side, and then the next thing we're gonna do is sew our center front pleat. Okay, so you're going to take your pant fronts and put them right sides together, matching that crotch curve, just putting those raw edges on top of each other. But what we're going to do next is we're going to sew along that marked center front pleat line. So you can align all those raw edges, but the most important thing is we want to make sure that the pleat lines are right on top of each other. So I'm taking a pin and putting it through both layers and then checking the underside to make sure that those pleat lines are exactly on top of each other. And I'm just continuing to pin all the way down the pleat line, checking as I go. I want to be super precise with this. And then my final pin is going to be at that circle mark. So make sure that the circle marks are right on top of each other too. And that's where we're going to stop stitching. And next we're going to take it to the machine and stitch along the pleat line. All right, so I'm back to my regular stitch length of 2.5, stitching right along that marked line. And then I'm going to backstitch. And just a tip, if your pants get a lot of wear and tear, you can backstitch back and forth a couple times at the circle to reinforce that point. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is, working from the wrong side of the culottes, you're going to open out the pleat. So think of it kind of like little butterfly wings here. You've got the pant front and then the pleat opened out. And now we're going to press this flat. It's a little tricky. You want to make sure that the pleat is on top of the pocket layers here. And just isolate that center front pleat seam line. And now we're going to press down to where the pleat opens up. And you're going to want to check this from the right side. I did get a little crease. It's hard to do all these layers at once. So now I'm going to try to press that crease out. And you can see I accidentally folded the pocket underneath. So just make sure you get all the layers flat and spend a little time getting them nice and crease-free. Okay, so now that we've pressed this center front pleat seam, now we're going to sew the center front crotch seam. And this is really like you would sew the crotch seam on any other pair of pants at this point. So just going to put that front crotch curve right sides together, aligning the raw edges around the curve. And then we're going to be stitching the crotch curve at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so there's my sewn crotch curve. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to serge these seam allowances together as one, trimming them down to about 3/8 of an inch. If you have another way that you prefer to finish your pant seam allowances, go ahead and do that now. I'm going to serge mine. Okay, so there's my center front crotch seam sewn and finished as one. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to baste the pleat in place. But what you need to do is open out the body of the pleat and then align the center front crotch seam with the center front pleat seam line so that they are right on top of each other. And the pleat needs to be folded over the pockets. So this is a little bit of a tricky area, and I'm finding that it's just helping me to work on a raised surface like a ham, because you really want to make sure that those seam lines are right on top of each other. So just spend a little time with this. And with linen, you can really finger press it too. So you can just sort of crease it with your fingers before you come in with the iron and press it. And now I'm pressing the edges of the pleat. And you don't have to do it all the way down the pant leg. You can just do it to the bottom of the pleat line. So the center front pleat line where it opens out. And now I'm going to pin the layers in place along the waistline edge, making sure that the pleat is pinned over the pocket layers. And the next thing we're going to do is baste this upper edge in place. And I'm just checking my work from the front. There's where my pleat opens out. You want to make sure that all the layers are flat and pressed correctly. If you want, you can give it a little press from the right side as well, if your fabric will tolerate that. And now I'm going to take this to the machine and just baste those layers in place along the upper edge. And these layers keep wanting to get out of place. So you want to make sure that the pleat is on top of the pocket layers there. Give it another pin if you need to. And now we're going to baste that upper edge. Okay, so going to my machine, I am using a long basting stitch again, and I'm just stitching this from the wrong side so that I make sure that all these layers stay where they're supposed to, and basting at 1/2 inch. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the pant back. So you are going to grab your pant backs. You want to make sure that you have stabilized the center back zipper opening down to the zipper circle. And also you want to make sure that you have your pleat line marked in, just like we did for the front. And you want to have sewn your dart already and pressed it towards center back. And the next thing we're going to do is we are going to work on the zipper opening. The back is a little more complicated than the front just because you have the zipper plus the pleat, which all kind of end on top of each other. So there's going to be the zipper and then the pleat will open up and then you finish the zipper underneath the pleat. But I'm going to show you how to do the whole thing, so don't worry. We're going to take it step by step. The left side of this pant back, which is going to be the overlap side, we're going to press this in 5/8 of an inch. So this is just like any other lap zipper, which we've done many times. And on the right side, you're going to press it in 1/2 an inch. This is the underlap side. So let's start with that. You're going to take the seam allowance from the zipper circle up to the waist and measure it so you get a precise 1/2 an inch and press the seam allowance to the wrong side. Okay, so now that we've done the underlap side, we are going to focus on the overlap side or the left side of your pant back. And you're going to turn that in 5/8 of an inch, which conveniently is half the width of this stabilizing tape. So I'm not measuring, I'm just bringing in that raw edge to meet the edge of the tape and pressing in place. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we are going to focus on the pleat. So take these steps very slowly, really focus on it because it is a little bit tricky. Now what you're going to do is you want to transfer your pleat line to the right side of the fabric. So one little tip is that you can use pins to do that. If you don't want to use a disappearing ink marker, you can just take a pin and put them through aligning exactly with the marked center back pleat line all the way down to your pleat circle. And you want your last pin to be right on that pleat circle. And now this will give us a temporary marked pleat line on the right side with that row of pins. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fold along my row of pins and press this in place. Okay, now I'm removing those pins. And now I'm going to open up that crease line. So I have two creased lines here, the center back where the zipper goes, and then my pleat line. So you want to unfold them both, the center back zipper opening as well. And now we're going to align those two crease lines right on top of each other. And here I'm pinning from the pleat mark side, but actually I think it's a little easier to pin from the zipper crease side. It's just a little easier to keep an eye on the fold. So keep that in mind. That's what I ended up doing for my next one. But you're going to align the creases right on top of each other and make sure that they're exactly on top of each other. Very important to be precise here. So spend a lot of time pinning. And then we're going to stitch these two layers together along the marked line, ending at the circle mark. And now the important thing is when you're stitching, you want to make sure that this creased seam allowance stays open, doesn't fold back in on itself. So now I'm stitching along this line and ending at the circle mark. And like I said, you can stitch from either side. Okay, now I'm going to fold everything back the way that we initially creased it. And you can repress it so it's all aligned on top of each other. And I'm compressing in my pleat there. And so now you can see what we have is a pleat that opens out at that circle mark on top of the back zipper opening. And next I'm going to repeat that whole process with the right side. Remember that that seam allowance is only turned in 1/2 inch, but it's the same idea. You are aligning the creases with each other and then stitching from the inside. Okay, and on this side, I'm going to show you how you can stitch from the zipper side, so the side with the zipper tape. So I'm just unfolding that crease seam allowance and aligning the crease with the crease underneath it. And the only thing about stitching from this side is that you need to transfer the circle mark at the bottom to the other side. So you can just put a pin right through or 2 pins on top of each other and an X, just so you know exactly where to stop your stitching at that pleat circle. Okay, so now I'm stitching from the crease side with on top of the zipper stabilizing tape and stitching right along that crease and ending where I marked the circle mark with pins. Okay, and just like the other side, you're just going to turn everything back to the way you originally creased it. So folding back in that zipper opening seam allowance, folding in the pleat, and just getting everything aligned on top of each other and then pressing. And now you can see when I turn it this way that we have the zipper opening turned in and the pleat opening out at the bottom. Okay, here are our pant backs, and you can see where the pleat opens out at the pleat circle. And now we're going to sew the center back crotch seam. Now there are 2 circles here, so it can get a little confusing. There's the pleat circle, and then there is a zipper circle below it. So you're sewing the center back crotch seam from the zipper circle to the center crotch point. So start pinning them together at the zipper circle, which is where the base of your stabilizer tape is, your interfacing. So start pinning together right sides there and pin all the way down to the crotch point. Right there. So you're going to align those raw edges around the crotch curve and then stitch from the zipper circle on at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so now that that seam is sewn, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip into my seam allowances at the zipper circle. And that way I'll be able to finish my seam allowances as one below the zipper circle, trimming down to 3/8 of an inch. And then above the zipper circle, I'm going to isolate just those raw seam allowances here. And I'm going to serge those without trimming off any of the seam allowance, just to prevent any fraying. Okay, so now we are ready to sew the zipper in. So just to review, what you have is the zipper opening with the seam allowances pressed in. You have your pleat opening at the bottom. You finished your seam allowances above the zipper circle, and then below, I've finished them as one, trimming to 3/8 of an inch. So now we're ready to insert the zipper, and we're going to start with the underlap side. So take your zipper and place it behind the folded in fabric, and you're going to align the top zipper stop just below 5/8 of an inch at the waistline. And now I'm going to start pinning it in place, and I'm aligning the fold of the fabric of the pants so that it's just next to the zipper teeth. Okay, so just next to it, not on top of it, and then pinning right on the fold. Now, the unusual thing about this design is that you have a couple layers on top of each other. Normally you would just have 2 layers, the pant and then the turned in seam allowance. But because we have the pleat there too, just keep that in mind. You're going to be pinning through a little bit more than usual. And when you get down to where the pleat opens, what we're going to have to do is you're going to have to stitch, backstitch, break your stitching, lift up the pleat here, and then finish your zipper stitching underneath. Okay, so pin it with that in mind. You're gonna have to lift up the pleat and pin underneath it. And you're just gonna open your zipper about halfway, and then we're gonna go over to the machine. Okay, so I'm switching to my zipper foot here and just adjusting my needle so I can stitch as close as possible to the fold. And now I'm stitching right along the fold of the fabric here, about 1/8 of an inch away. Just keeping all the layers as flat as possible here, taking out my pins as I go. Now I'm coming up on the zipper pull here. So when I get close to the zipper pull, I'm going to stop with my needle down, and then I will lift up the presser foot, which will let me close the zipper, get the pull out of the way, and then continue. And so here I'm just stitching until the point where the pleat opens out from the pant. So right where that pleat circle was, basically. So I'm stitching right to that point and then back stitching. And then I'm going to break my stitching here, trim all those threads close, and then put it right back in, lifting up the pleat so that I can stitch right underneath it. So you should be able to really get this close so there's no gap in between your 2 rows of stitching, but that the pleat is still able to lift up. Okay, so I'm going to finish sewing this side of the zipper and backstitch at the bottom. Okay, so now we're going to focus on the overlap side of the zipper. You have your zipper closed here, and now we're going to take the overlap fold and place it so that it just covers the line of stitching that you just did. And then I'm going to pin it in place about 3/8 of an inch from the fold, and I'm creating the overlap here. So I'm pinning to the left of the zipper teeth. Pinning all the way down until I get to that pleat again, just like on the underlap side. Okay, here's my pleat opening. So this is where I'm gonna have to stop stitching again, lift up the pleat, and then finish my stitching. So I'm going to continue pinning below the pleat, again pinning at about 3/8 of an inch, and that's where I'll be top stitching this. And as always with the lap zipper, I like to put a horizontal pin at the bottom because that's where we're going to pivot to make that L shape of stitching that is the classic look for a lap zipper. And just make sure that you can open your zipper all the way, and then we're going to go stitch this. Okay, so the kind of zipper foot I use, I just have to switch the needle to the other side so I can stitch on the opposite side of the teeth. And I'm going to be top stitching at 3/8 of an inch. And just like with any lap zipper, the zipper teeth are going to be between the folded edge and my stitching here. So I'm just going to continue down, and I'm using one of the lines on my machine to make sure that my top stitching is even here. And again, just when I get to the pleat here, I'm going to back stitch, break my stitching, then lift up that pleat and continue my stitching below it. And from here on, it's like any other lap zipper. I'm going to stitch as close as I can to the zipper pull. So go as far as you can until you need to stop with your needle down, lift up your presser foot, and then close the zipper part way to get the pull out of the way. So right about here, I'm going to get that zipper pull out of the way. And then I'm just going to eyeball the rest of the top stitching from here down to my horizontal pin. So continuing to stitch until I get to my horizontal pin, and then I'm going to pivot and do a little L shape, tiny line of stitching at the base of the zipper opening here, and then back stitch. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just press this a little bit. I saw a little bit of rippling on my zipper, and just steaming a little is helping to get those ripples out of the top stitching at the base. So just make sure that you're really careful about how you press with the pleat and everything. And there is your finished lap zipper. And you can press the overlap part too. Get in between the pleat layers. And there we go. So it should open like this, traditional lap zipper, but then you're also able to have your pleat at the base. And having the zipper at center back with the pleat allows this to interchange with the Lamour-series. So you can make your rompers or play suits or whatever you want to make now. Okay, so now we're going to sew our side seams on the culotte. So you're going to take your culotte back, and then you're going to put it right sides together with the culotte front. And just align those side seams and match any notches. Like there's a notch at the base of the pocket, so you want to match that up. And pin from top to bottom. And this is a pretty long piece, so I'm not going to be able to show the whole thing on camera, but I'm going to keep pinning, and then I'm going to pin the opposite out seam, and then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch at 5/8 of an inch and press these seams open. And then when I come back, we're going to talk about sewing the inseam. Okay, so I've sewn my side seams and pressed them open. And now we're going to focus on the inseam. So you just need to match your crotch point first. And you just want to make sure that the seam allowances stay pressed in the same direction as you pressed them earlier and as each other. And I'm going to pin at my crotch point first. And then I'm going to continue pinning down each leg. And then when I go to sew this, I'm going to start at one pant hem, go all the way up to the crotch point, and continue down to the opposite pant hem. So again, these are really big pieces. It's hard to show you the whole thing on camera here. So I'm gonna sew this off camera, and I'm gonna press these open just like we did the side seams, and then we'll come back and do the waistband. Okay, so we're at the point in the garment where if you would like to make a playsuit or a romper, at this point you are going to go ahead and construct your L-series bodice, sew it together with the culottes at the waist, and then insert a zipper like you would for a dress and finish your garment, okay? But if you're making the separate culottes like I am today, the next thing we're gonna do is we're going to sew our waistbands. Okay, I just want to mention the hem really quick before we move on to the waistband. I have already gone ahead and hemmed these pants. So I had the raw edges finished, and then I pressed the hem allowance in a full inch and then top stitched at 7/8 of an inch. And now we can move on to the waistband next. Okay, so you're gonna grab your waistband, and the thing to note about the waistband is that the overlap side and the underlap side are marked on the pattern piece, and you wanna keep track of those. So on the right here, I have my underlap side, and that's the side with the notch kind of close to that short end. So you wanna orient that to your right as you're working on this waistband to make sure that you have the correct overlap and underlap sides that you're sewing onto the pant. Okay, so underlap side on the right with your notch. And now the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to fold the waistband in half lengthwise, and I'm gonna press it to crease, to make a crease down the center of this piece lengthwise. Okay, and now we're going to open it out. Now that you've creased it, open it out, and we're gonna fold in the long upper edge, 5/8 of an inch. Okay, so turn it in 5/8 of an inch and press all the way along one long edge. Okay, so now that we've creased all of those edges that we need to crease, we're gonna focus on the short ends. So I'm gonna start with the left short end, and I'm going to fold it right sides together. And you wanna keep the seam allowance turned up, okay? But fold it along the crease, that lengthwise crease, but right sides together, and we're gonna stitch along this short end at 5/8 of an inch. Okay, now we're gonna focus on the other short end, which is the underlap end. And the underlap end has a 1-inch extension, so it's done a little bit differently than the other side. You need to unfold the seam allowance, and we are going to pin along the short end, and we're gonna stop stitching at the notch along the long end. So you can give yourself a little dot or something if you wanna know where to stop stitching, but we're gonna stitch along this short end here. And then I'm gonna pivot at the corner at 5/8 of an inch. You can see both of my seam allowances are turned out. Nothing is creased still here. Okay, and now I'm stopping and pivoting, and then I'm gonna go to right where the notch is on the underlap extension and backstitch. Okay, so now I'm just gonna trim away any excess, trimming away from the corners here, the corner where I pivoted, and then I'm gonna clip into where the notch is on the underlap extension, clipping all the way to the seam line. And then just trim down the seam allowances just to get rid of any bulk in this little extension. And then on the other side, again, you're just gonna trim away any corners, trim away seam allowances. Okay, so now I'm going to grab my pants and we're going to turn those back corners of the waistband right side out, including that little extension on the end, the underlap end. So take a little time with that, get those corners nice and neat, and then press those flat just to get them as crisp as possible. And now I'm going to start matching the waistband to the pant. The underlap extension goes on the right side as you wear it, as you're looking at it too. And it matches the underlap side of the zipper. And so that 1 inch just extends past center back on that side. And now I'm just matching up any match points like notches get matched to side seams, etc., making sure that the darts are pressed in the right direction. Okay, and then on the other side, the left side of the zipper opening as you're looking at it, those two edges are going to be flush with each other. So they end at center, the waistband ends exactly at center back. So you can see when I turn this up how they're exactly flush. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time pinning here. You want to make sure that you get all of those match points perfect. And then we're going to come back and we will stitch the waistband to the pants. Okay, so we're going to start stitching on one side of the zipper opening. And the key here is that you want to keep one side of the waistband opened out. So that side that we creased in the seam allowance, make sure that it's away from your stitching and just hold it away so that you don't catch it in your stitching. And now I'm going to start stitching at that end where the seam allowances meet. The extension is just beyond it, back stitch. Make sure that you don't stitch over the zipper stop there because you will break your needle. And I'm just going to stitch all the way around the waistband. And because I'm stitching from the waistband side, I'm just going to periodically check to make sure that all my seam allowances are staying pressed open, my darts are staying pressed in the direction I originally pressed them, etc. So continuing on like this, and then next we will have some finishing to do. Okay, and one final thing is that I'm going to grade these seam allowances. So the pant seam allowance will be the shorter one. I'm going to trim that all the way around. And then the waistband seam allowance is slightly taller. So grade your seam allowances all around the waistband. And then we're going to talk about the finishing steps. Okay, so the next thing to do is to press your waistline seam allowances up towards the waistband. And then you're going to fold back the waistband where we creased it originally so that it conceals the seam allowances inside. And then I'm going to slip stitch this in place, slip stitching the waistband edge to the seam line underneath. The other thing you could do is stitch in the ditch. You would just have to make sure that this folded edge is completely covering the seam line, pin from the right side, and then stitch in the ditch. It's just a little tricky because you have to make sure that you're catching that underneath while stitching from the right side. And then the very last thing to do is to sew your hook and bar. So you're going to close your zipper, and then align the waistband overlap and underlap. And then the hook side of the hook and bar gets sewn to the overlap side. You're going to position that in there and hand stitch. And then you're going to position the bar side to the underlap extension, making sure that they align perfectly. And then your pants are done. Okay, everyone, that is it, your capri length Elsa Culottes. So I hope you've loved learning how to make them today, and I hope you're inspired to make one in every variation. So as always, please share your makes with me on social media. You can use the hashtag #CharmPatterns or Elsa Culottes, and I can't wait to see what you make. So thank you for being patrons, and I hope you've loved this month's project. I will see you next time. Goodbye.